It's a war in the east of Congo that the rest of the world has paid too little attention to. We've seen the M23 rebellion make gains and make its way towards the eastern Congolese city of Goma. Against the backdrop, there's been accusations by Kinshasa that the rebels have been supported by Rwanda. Representatives from both the DR Congo and the Rwandan foreign minister meeting under the auspices of the Angolan president, who you see there, João Lourenço, in Luanda this Wednesday. Also present, the East African Community's chair, Burundian President Evariste Ndayishimiye, and the former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. They're hoping to facilitate talks and that they will lead to further discussions in the coming weeks that could bring peace. Well, for more on this story, we can turn now to the northern French city of Lille. Richard Moncrieff is the Interim Director for the Great Lakes at International Crisis Group. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thanks very much for having me on. Thank you.
Let's begin by just painting the picture. What's at stake with that meeting taking place in the Angolan capital?
Well, potentially there's quite a lot at stake, because at the heart of the diplomatic row is a big dispute between Kinshasa and Kigali. And Kinshasa in particular, that Kinshasa accuses its eastern neighbour, Rwanda, of backing the M23 rebellion, which is currently causing havoc in the North Kivu province and more or less surrounding the large city of Goma, cutting supplies off to that city to some degree. Prices are rising very steeply at the moment. There's a lot of tension in that city, and occasionally over the last few weeks, a degree of panic at the thought that these M23 rebels might enter the city, which they did indeed do so 10 years ago.
10 years ago, and this is an area where we've had for 2 decades UN peacekeepers. Since the start of the month, we've also had Kenyan soldiers who've arrived. Ugandans are expected, and yet the rebels are stronger than ever, it seems.
Yes, the UN that's been there more or less for 15, 20 years has really failed to stem violence in that part of the world. The UN is not really suited, equipped, or willing to go out and fight armed groups. And it's not clear that just fighting armed groups is going to bring much of a resolution. Some of these armed groups support their communities, or at least they come from communities that feel they need some kind of defense. And other of the armed groups in some way come from the problems of neighbours or are supported by neighbours. So just having UN troops there doesn't in itself do very much good, unless it's backed up by strong diplomacy. Now, the Luanda summit that's finishing today, or at least is taking place today, is meant to be a part of that strong diplomacy. But unfortunately, the Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who I understand was invited, has not turned up. So the cast list doesn't quite yet look right for bringing a resolution to this and trying to, let's say, get the diplomacy right as the troops are going into Goma to try to make sure that things don't escalate on the ground at the same time.
Richard, we know that Felix Tshisekedi, the Congolese president, is in the Angolan capital. Rwanda represented not by Paul Kagame, but by his foreign minister. Any word on why?
Well, the Congolese President Tshisekedi has used some very strong words against the Rwandans in the last few weeks and even the last couple of months, starting notably at the UN General Assembly in September, directly accusing Rwandans of supporting the M23 rebel group. But, going a bit further and using some pretty strong language, saying that Rwanda is out to pillage the resources of Eastern Congo and so forth. It's a language which has a lot of resonance with Congolese citizens. But it's not necessarily diplomatically helpful. So there's quite a distance between these two presidents to bridge. It's notable that Tshisekedi just sent his prime minister to the Francophonie summit in Tunisia a week or so ago, And this time, Paul Kagame is kind of, doing the same in return by sending someone more junior. So the two presidents haven't met since July. Since then, there's been severe deterioration on the ground. And we do think that a resolution between these two presidents is important to de-escalating things, because Rwanda does, all evidence seems to point that Rwanda does have at least a very strong influence over the M23 rebel group.
Why is it coming to a head?
Well, that's a good question. It's not absolutely clear to everyone, but it would seem that there are two factors that most people point to. One is the Ugandans entered the Congo recently, or a few months ago, or more than that, to fight rebel groups up in the Ituri province, which is north of North Kivu. Now, Rwanda and Uganda are rivals. They've always been rivals for influence in Eastern Congo. And a lot of the people with insight into what's happening in Kigali are saying that the Rwandans were upset at this, that they felt frozen out of influence in Eastern Congo. So they're trying to get their stick back in. On the other, another factor is the M23 itself, which is made up of former rebels. They're Congolese, even if they have ties to Rwanda. They're former insurgents, some of whom have been in and out of the army. And they have various demands. One of those key demands, even if they don't always express it, is to regain their positions within the army. Kinshasa has drawn a red line under that and said, we don't want any more insurgents joining our army. It's not helpful for army reform. It's not worked in the past. And I think the M23's actions are in part to put pressure on Kinshasa so that when Congolese officials and the M23 eventually sit down and talk, which is likely to happen one day, the M23 have put sufficient pressure on Kinshasa to get what they want out of the negotiations.
Richard, we're going to call up a map here just to show the region. And you mentioned at the outset how Goma is nearly entirely surrounded by these rebels. We're talking about a populous area. Just give an idea to our viewers here of what this latest fighting means for civilians.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's start with the civilians who've already been affected in the Rutshuru territory, which is north of Goma along the Rwandan border. And there's been huge displacement. The UN are talking about over 180,000 people displaced this month. Many of those have already been displaced. And we hear harrowing stories of families living in displacement camps being pushed out of those camps and having nowhere to go by the violence. It's not necessarily that the rebel groups or the M23 are directly pushing them out of the camps, but of course, as fighting spreads, they're trying to find a safe haven. Some are going into Goma. Goma's got a long tradition of welcoming, unfortunately, displaced people from neighboring countryside, but it's a town under great pressure. It's got a lake to the south. To the east is the Rwandan border. And it tends to get its supplies from a large road going north, which has already been blocked by the fighting. And now the M23 appear to be moving west and blocking off some of the other access routes into Goma, where prices have doubled on some products and much more than doubled on other products just in the last week or two.
Wow. Richard Moncrieff of Crisis Group, many thanks for speaking with us from Lille.
Pleasure. Thank you.